Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's CMMC Town Hall. Now I'd like to introduce your host, Ed Bassett from NeoSystems. Ed?
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our continuing series of Town Hall Ask Me Anything sessions on cybersecurity maturity model certification. My guest today is Bill Stevens. Also joining us, you'll see on your screen, is Wade Forbes, who for the last couple of sessions has been diagramming these sessions in real time, and we will send that out as a reminder for folks who are here today. So keep an eye on that. It's fairly interesting how he's capturing visually what we're talking about with words. I want to mention to the audience, we are recording these sessions as part of our community outreach to the Defense Industrial Base. Our focus as a managed service provider is primarily on organizations that are looking for certification under the CMMC program, and that's primarily who's in our audience today. If you do have some questions during the session for Bill, please send those in on the Q&A feature within Zoom, and I will try to work as many of those in as time allows. I'll start with a quick introduction of our guest, Bill Stevens. Bill is a professor of practice and the director of counterintelligence research at ARLIS. That's the Applied Research Lab for Intelligence and Security. Prior to ARLIS, Bill served 11 years in the Defense Intelligence Senior Executive Service at the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, or DCSA. He was the assistant director for counterintelligence there. One of the highlights of his time at DCSA is pioneering the Deliver Uncompromised initiative, which is aimed at shifting responsibility to industry for protecting intellectual property that's important to our national security. Prior to that, Bill served for 27 years as a U.S. Air Force officer in the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, primarily in the field of counterintelligence. So Bill, thanks for your service and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So last week on this series, we had one of your colleagues, Harvey Rishikoff, also from ARLIS. He spoke to us about supply chain risk, insider risks, some other cyber-related risks that government contractors face. Today, we're really interested to take that discussion even further, exploring some threats across both cyber and non-cyber worlds. And while CMMC has been very focused on the defensive measures that are taken by contractors, Bill's promised to take a look at how the offense part of our posture factors into our national security strategy. So Bill, welcome, and we'll dive into some questions if you're
I'm ready.
Thank you. Cool.
Thanks, Ed.
So CMMC initiative, it's been described by the DoD as being about improving cyber hygiene so as to stem the flow of intellectual property to our adversaries. And for the most part, what we're dealing with there is espionage, right? Espionage that has been historically pretty effective, historically that we all agree we need to do a better job of deterring. I feel that many in our audience have found themselves in the middle of a fight they didn't expect, and in some cases, without much training or experience. So Bill, in your background, in counterintelligence, very, very deep, you held one of the top CI jobs in the country, and you've been immersed in that world for your whole career. You've described this as an all-of-nation fight. Help us understand a little bit about that. What does this fight look like, and how and why is the Defense Industrial Base involved in it?
Yeah, so we are clearly, from my perspective, it's my opinion, we're in an all-of-nation fight. It's not just a government-to-government fight, which is what most Americans today view as a challenge between our governments when they become serious. Our adversaries are really better at employing every element of national power, whether that's military, economic, which would be industry, obviously, academic, intelligence, diplomatic, the whole effort. So we have some adversaries that have a different level of control over what we would describe as something that's non-government, again, like academic, economic, and or industries activity. And they're quite good at employing that to achieve their interests within the United States. They're moving against the United States in what typically would be described in military terms as the rear area. In other words, the United States at home. So the United States has really not had to defend at home since really 1814. We haven't really had to think about it. We are built for away games. That's what we're good at. We're not just a little good at it, we're really good at it. The problem today, the information age has brought us into a home game, and we're not accustomed to it. So if you're sitting overseas and you're in a conflict, the rear area would be where the headquarters is, and we're quite good at defending that rear area, and the senior people there have a full picture of what's taking place anywhere around that. The senior American officer would know, or the senior American civilian would know. That's not necessarily the case here in the United States, because how we divide our responsibilities, how it is that the Americans, because of a lot of our civil liberties, et cetera. Our adversaries, unfortunately, have been quite successful, and I hope I don't have to explain a whole lot of this. I don't think it's necessary. OPM, the compromise at OPM, SolarWinds is a more recent one. MD Anderson, the loss of cancer research down in Houston, recent arrest at the University of Kansas, one of their professors for theft of research. That's just 4 quick examples, and there are now hundreds and hundreds. There's a long list. So our adversaries, they have the initiative, which means basically that they're acting and we're responding. It's not the other way around. And in military terms, it's not good to be the one reacting. You want to be the actor to drive them to what you're looking for. So that's how we find ourselves, at least from my perspective. You know, the DIB is involved because that's where our national treasure is, in my opinion. I've worked on the cleared work for that's 10,000 companies, and the DIB can be described as somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 companies, according to who's saying it. But that is where our national treasure actually is, in Bill Stevens' opinion. Therefore, it's the target. So, and it's critical to say here that it's irrespective of classification. It's classified work, of course, is very important, but our adversaries just go after what's important to them. Whether it's classified or not doesn't make a whole lot of difference. I was in a conversation probably 20 years ago with a defector, foreign intelligence service officer from a foreign government. And I was running through my list of questions with the guys, and I specifically asked him about him tasking for classified information. And he surprised me by saying, "Oh, I don't directly do that. I just directly pose the questions about what we're interested in. We look for an answer. The reason I do that, because if I ask specifically for classified, that subjects me to FBI. It subjects me to the FBI." And he says, "Besides, I get all my collection requirements in Crystal City anyway." And what he meant was, I go down there, strike up a conversation, and people speak out of school. That's been a very instructive, been a very instructive example for me for my entire career for a long, long time. So the bottom line is, if you have something worth stealing, the chance by a foreign intelligence service in particular, the chances that you've not been probed are, in my opinion, are very, very small. So the Americans need to be better at bringing industry and academia into the fight, basically. And that basically means to use them as sensors, which they do use, but also strengthen their defenses better. And so the government could get much better, I think, at doing that. We do it reasonably well for some portions, but it's not a effectively well orchestrated overall activity. There's a lot of people working at it. We have a lot of skilled people, whether the FBI, Department of Defense, et cetera. But full orchestration, when I said the rear area picture, if you're sitting forward in a fight, there is a single picture. Back here, there's really not a single picture of our adversaries. Common operating picture off of which we could operate. Industry, of course, would like that as well, so they could actually improve their defenses. That's something that could be improved upon. So the Americans have to bring all the elements of national power. And I think most people in the American government recognize that. How we get to it is what I would offer, hopefully where we go next. So there you go, Ed.
As rear areas go, the United States is a big one, right? And I think, you know, in a traditional theater, the rear area is the people who are in that, they know they're in a theater of war, even though they're in a rear area. And I think that's the big difference that you're pointing out. So
yes,
yeah, yep. So CMMC specifically is, you know, cyber focused, and it's looking at threats that are directed to our data and the systems we use to store and process it. But there's more to the defense industrial base than information systems, obviously, right? There's manufacturing and all the hard industry pieces that make that up as well. Our adversaries like to target information systems because that's where they can find the crown jewels sometimes. But often what they're trying to compromise is not a cyber thing. They're trying to compromise a weapon systems, a technology, manufacturing, other capabilities where we have some advantage. So how do those cyber and non-cyber worlds interact in this fight that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, so I'll make it clear. Anybody that knows me and is listening to this knows this, but I'm not a cyber expert, and I certainly don't want to masquerade as such. I've had the great fortune, though, of working with a lot of super skilled cyber folks, and a bunch of them worked for me in my last job, and they helped me quite a bit. And the main thing was they recognized that the problem is actually much larger than a cybersecurity problem, and the responses would require more than just a cyber response quite often. So I would say to offer a shorthand picture here, I can give you from my last job, for example, we would get 45,000 reports, human reports, and not IT type reports. It would be 45,000 reports from industry that their security people were having an issue. It could be a cyber, it could not be. Of those 45,000, we essentially triaged them down to about 6,000 in any typical year. More or less 6,000 were triaged into a counterintelligence, something of a counterintelligence interest. What does that mean? That means that it met Defense Intelligence Agency collection requirements. So these 6,000 things, we were able to parse them and look at them closely. So an interesting statistic, and again, I'm trying to mix a whole bunch of beers here together to give a perspective. Of those 6,000 in a typical year, 15% would be cyber only. 15% only would be cyber only. 35% would be human only. 50% would include both. So the caution here is from my perspective, is if in your protocol is you're performing a human-only activity in defense, or you have those people separate from the cyber people, and or the cyber people are doing a cyber-only activity, I think you'll recognize the chances of you getting crushed are really high. So what you essentially see is a good example, a typical example would be that I've seen over and over and over again would be foreign people, foreign visitors come in. They pose questions that are inappropriate. The team appropriately does not answer those questions. They leave, and you get hit within a day or 2 weeks. You get hit basically with probes related to that specific stuff. Or you've got the other. You detect a whole bunch of probing that takes place. It's unsuccessful, and then all of a sudden, bang! You get a request from a foreign activity to come in. Hey, we'd like to have a conversation. That's an example that I see over and over again. There are more exotic ones, more sophisticated ones, but that's one I think that a lot of people would recognize. So if, and this is mostly cyber people in the conversation, if you create a sensitive enclave of some kind, and the problem is typically not with the information jumping out of that enclave. Hopefully the security, the cyber folks are pretty decent at getting that taken care of typically. The challenge is what is in the heads of the people that use that capability? And when does that jump out of their head or their mouth? Or does it jump out of their fingertips on completely unprotected communications? I would offer it doesn't matter. If there's a protected enclave, no matter what it is, most of the information or the risk associated with that is who's touching it and how it's jumping out of their head, whether they're asked to go to a foreign country to speak as a professor, whether they're asked to go to and speak as some kind of expert, or they're engaged in a conversation in Crystal City, or they're emailing related to that stuff, but they're not using the protected enclaves that have been secured. So if you're a cyber person and you're interested truly in securing something like that, you will make your counterintelligence or security people who aren't the cyber folks participate every step of the way, and they should be doing the same thing. Now, those cultures, in my experience, don't necessarily mix really well sometimes, and that's why I was so fortunate to have the team that I had in my last job, because they were all about catching the bad guys no matter what the requirement was. So that's what I would offer.
Very interesting. So, we've heard some statistics. You mentioned some examples. These are some scary items where the adversaries have been winning, and it seems like they're winning a lot. So I guess my first question is, do you think that's accurate? Are they in fact winning a lot? Are they being unusually successful? And do they have an advantage? You mentioned in your opener, you mentioned about some of these adversaries have better control over some of those capabilities and are able to do things. So is our adversary at an advantage to us? Our adversaries, I should say plural.
Yeah, so well, my opinion is that in the information age, the advantage is clearly to the attacker. But I will say that they do, in fact, have the initiative because, again, we're responding. And a lot of it is, the Defense Science Board in 2013 came out with I think I have it written here, Task Force Report, Resilient Military Systems and the Advanced Cyber Threat. And basically, one of the, I think, serious conclusions is defense only is a failed strategy. It essentially states that cyber defenses are necessary, and that's true. That's why the CMMC thing is necessary, but it's insufficient if you're really serious about stopping the intelligence agencies from attacking, and ideally even stop them from trying by creating doubt, regret, and confusion in them. So this defense-only approach, Kevin Mandian was spoke in front of the Senate last week. I don't know if you know that or not. It was very interesting, his response. He and somebody from Microsoft and then somebody else were speaking, and they were going down this lane and in this conversation. And I'm paraphrasing when I say this, but basically he said, they were asking him about, the condition we're in. And he said, well, he compared it to Wayne Gretzky being in position and having the opportunity at penalty shots. And you're the goalie and you're trying to defend against Wayne Gretzky slap shots one after the other all day long, because sooner or later they're going to get in, right? You might be able to prove your position a little bit by getting a little quicker, maybe a little more flexible, but at the end of the day, he's playing offense all day long and you're playing defense, and he is going to be able to get through. So that's how it was described. The events related to what was SolarWinds. That's what Kevin Mandia was describing last week. So the challenge is that our cyber game and the United States, right, tries aggressively to reduce vulnerabilities. So with the risk equation, risk is a function of threat, vulnerability, and consequence, which I understand comes from the cyber community, and one that I certainly use, is that if we're endlessly spending our energy just reducing vulnerabilities and not directly having somebody attack the threat directly, then if we are playing soccer and we never shoot on the opponent's goal, the chances we're going to win are zero. We might end up 0-0. We might be able to defend fairly well, but to actually win is not a very high opportunity, is what I would offer. So that's what I would describe as the condition we're in. The examples of our losses recently is a description of what our adversaries, I think, are taking. So that's my answer to that one.
And yeah, CMMC is very focused on the defensive. I think everybody in our audience, they want to get cybersecurity right. That's why they're here on this call, taking time out of their day, is because they want to do that defensive piece right. But as you're mentioning, it's not sufficient. So the offensive piece of cyber, what we do on the offense, is principally a government function. Although I do know some private sector companies that believe otherwise, but within the limits of what they're able to do, most of that offense is governmentally driven. So yes. How do you see that intersecting? How do we in the DIB inform, assist, interact with what the government's doing on the offensive side, right? So that defense and offense can work together. How do you see that happening in an ideal world?
Well, you're right. Hacking back apparently is against the law. So, and doing some level of creating doubt, regret, and confusion in our enemy would also be considered probably an offensive effort, but maybe not all of it. That's definitely a gray area from what it is that we can and cannot do. I've done in my career, I was all about creating doubt, regret, and confusion in our adversary, but I didn't have to worry. I didn't have to worry from the roles that I was in, that you do in private industry. But I would say that you have to envision of what I think anyway, it's gonna be, and we will have very little choice but to develop a much tighter all-of-nation approach, which means academia and industry and will have to actually be tighter. And in that role, I still don't see the government giving away any authority to strike at the adversary. So thinking of yourself as a censor for the government so that they could turn and perform and then execute. Thinking of yourself not as just a defense against an adversary, but detecting what takes place and seeing if you, in fact, can grease the skids to the action people. The more important and the more valuable the stuff you're working on, the more likely it is, I suspect, that FBI is going to be able to respond. The reality is that they're super under-resourced for all of these activities. They do have the ability to execute and to get these things done. Get these things done as required. Let's see here. I think building a relationship with the FBI or anybody that's doing something like that and operating as a censor is probably the best that you could hope for at this point. So building a relationship with them, facilitating their action, I think is probably the best you can do.
The information sharing is pretty key. One of our
I'm sorry, say that again.
Is that the idea of information sharing?
Yes.
That's in sensor mode is very key. One of our audience members is asking, the DIB lacks counterintelligence professionals as part of their security staff, and I would say that's generally true, right? Most people who are in the DIB as security professionals don't come from a CI background. This audience member is asking, should this change? Should there be an emphasis on getting counterintelligence skill sets out into the defense industrial base?
Yeah, so of course that's what I did my whole career. I don't think there's any question. So I can identify for you the companies that are better at doing this than others, and the people that are actually running these sorts of shows, and the notion that you have to recognize that you are being attacked. You have to recognize that defense only simply won't work. So, or at least not systemically, not comprehensively enough. Again, I'll repeat it. You have to have those defenses laid in, if nothing else, so you can detect the bad activity that's coming at you. But my bias certainly is toward a counterintelligence view of things, and so that you can complete a return serve on an adversary. You can engage the people that go against our adversaries. I'll tell you, there's a lot of security people are very afraid if they're doing cleared work, et cetera, because. And if they have responsibilities in the way of actually establishing certain defenses for the American, because they're working on American government stuff. But the reality is, my experience is that the skilled people in cleared work, which is most of my experience, they know. I mean, if the drill is, if you can get the American government to work in your interest and their interest at the same time. If you are fearless in your use of the American government people in doing that work. Yeah, you may have screwed up some sort of security thing, but the reality is they're, I think, far more interested in, if you've got something valuable, far more interested in moving after the adversary. So the smart guys will, and men and women will come and use the government people to move against the problem that they're having. A lot of people fear that they will be uncovered because they made some screw up in security, which everybody does, and they won't tell, and they just hope it goes unseen. But anyway, I would offer you acting as a sensor, building a good relationship with those who can execute against that problem, and then recognizing that the government only has so many folks to do that, at least right now. But it's the difference between keeping score and playing ball. And sometimes it's effective to have ball players in this game. And the counterintelligence people, I believe, are some people that could significantly strengthen. They quickly understand, I think, the game.
Well, we saw a good example of that. You mentioned Kevin Mandia, so he's CEO of FireEye. FireEye, was involved as one of the early detectors of the SolarWinds breach, and was very transparent in terms of disclosing what they knew, working with government, working with the rest of industry to make sure that the word got out very quickly. And I'm sure they were doing even more stuff, behind the scenes that the public doesn't know about. So very exemplary. But I would say FireEye is an outlier. I mean, they have more security talent in their company than 99% of the DIB, right? I mean, they're a security services company, highly skilled in what they do. So they had the ability to detect, but they also had the willingness to disclose that and share it in a way that I think we should all take as a lesson. But I would think a lot of companies would find that much more difficult to do. In other words, they wouldn't be so clear on what they could share. The legal risks and other things involved are some of the things that hold that back. You mentioned, people being afraid of screwing up. I mean, that's not just people, it's companies are afraid that if they start to disclose and share this information, it's going to hurt their image and they're going to take on some legal liability. So they tend to, close that down. And I think, finding ways to break those barriers from an information sharing perspective sound critical to pulling off what you're suggesting for sure.
Well, every U.S. government agency, even our most secure ones, have been penetrated. right? So any notion that a private firm's not going to be penetrated or they're impenetrable, I think is an error. Now, I'm not, you know, how might the markets react specifically? All I know is that I got immediately. I'm not one of the people that actually went and did inspections where I'm the CI guy. I would immediately get phone calls from certain companies. Hey, we've got this problem. This is what took place, and you know they had penetrated. That they wanted as quickly as possible to get the American government turned on that problem, because that was going to alleviate them of their, you know, it'll be more quickly. They'll be more quickly be able to move against that challenge that way. That was my experience. I'm sure there's a lot of people on this system that maybe have horrible experiences of some sort, but that is what I was used for, frankly, in my last job.
That's good. So I want to ask a question about, you have kind of a broad view on where the risks are, where the threats are, where the risks are. Right now, CMMC, it's a new requirement. It's got everybody's attention. It's changing a lot of thinking and behavior, which is, I think, generally a good thing. So we've seen companies that have previously not had a very structured approach to cybersecurity are now rethinking their spending, their approach. They're looking at their subcontractor base, their supplier base. They're looking at their IT strategy. So, I mean, all of that is good. My question is, as you look at the focus and the actions that are happening around that initiative, it's compliance driven. Are people addressing the right risks? They're all on a quest to get certified. We have to do it, right? Are we addressing the right risk, the most relevant risk, do you think?
Well, I think that a lot of compliance type activity is to clear the low bar and everybody walk away and say we're happy. So you have to ask yourself, do you want to look good or do you want to be good? Well, you can look good and not be very good at all. But usually if you're good, you're probably going to look good as well, particularly, I think, at least in this conversation. And that's what I would offer. I think that there have been a lot of differences in how acquisition, the intelligence community, law enforcement, everybody's approach, and the cyber community have approached this. I think that to give acquisition a kudo, they did put in their 5,000. What the objective was with the acquisition effort was uncompromised delivery and sustainment, really, of the program, of the technology, of the assets. And you could look at that for people too. Uncompromised delivery and sustainment of the workforce. That's really what we're talking about, right? That's now that uncompromised. Everybody is compromisable at some point, witting, unwitting, et cetera. How much and to what degree? It's a very esoteric conversation, but establishing that as a goal was absolutely, from my perspective, magnificent as how we need to approach this. So the reality is I would, and it may be expensive, I would definitely shoot above what those requirements are, because I think that's what ultimately is coming. And the idea is, can you actually really be good? Can you actually, what does it actually take to fend off these problems, or how is it you can orchestrate it? No one has the perfect right answer now. I think even there, we have some firms, again, some of our big 6 firms are quite good at this, some are less good. But everyone is moving toward that objective. And I think that simple idea, uncompromised delivery and sustainment, is what you have to view as the challenge for us all, and how it is that we would plug in. You're going to have government, non-government working together. Think about how it is that you could be the non-government piece of that overall picture. A government needs to provide a better picture to help people defend. Our people that are actually out defending need to realize they're a sensor and provide the information back to the American government to act. So act aggressively. I think our people probably, the cyber game could probably get, maybe there will be some direction on how to be a little more aggressive and how it is we can defend. And again, you heard me say earlier, to create doubt, confusion, and regret is a very valuable thing when you're engaging an adversary. So I hope that's a decent answer for you there, Ed.
Excellent. Yeah, we're near the end of our time, just a minute or two left. So I'll ask a wrap-up question. I like to always ask for kind of one suggestion about the CMMC program specifically. This is a program that's looking to change behavior across the entire DIB and really raise the bar for the weakest links, right? Get everybody on board. So what's your top suggestion for how the program, and I would say not just the program, but how we in industry are reacting to that program? How could we be more effective in addressing the full range of risks that we've talked about today?
Well, I'll have to kind of repeat what I just said a little bit. I'm sorry, but it really matters how viewing yourself as where you sit in this overall enterprise, and really what the enterprise we hope becomes, right? It's irrespective, classified, unclassified. You need to realize that if you're doing totally unclassified stuff, unclassified doesn't mean no threat. In fact, our greatest losses are that way, and the notion and using unclassified systems to be able to penetrate, et cetera, to find out information to get where our adversary wants to get to. Recognize unclassified, classified, really not going to matter too much. From this Bill's opinion, government, non-government must be linked, right? Cyber, non-cyber, you're crazy if you don't link with the people that do the opposite, have the opposite role. Those three things together, recognize that you're essentially a center for, I won't say just for the American government, but the role for industry is to function as a sensor, pass the information back, and then increasingly keep demanding to see the picture that the government has as best they can offer. When I talked about my rear area picture critique is there's not a very good one. There are certain organizations that have those better than others. Here, I've got a document here, the trends document that DCSA, I don't know if we still produce it, if they still produce it, it's called Targeting U.S. Technologies, but it offers a picture, taking that and incorporating that with what I've just said. It offers a picture of our adversary by region and but not by country, which methods that they're using, which points of contact they're using, and which technologies they're pursuing. It's all there. And if you can defend along those avenues of attack, I think you'll be way ahead of most people in and out of government and understanding what the challenge is. So that is what I would offer very quickly as a possible approach.
Bill, thank you very much. Excellent perspective. Really enjoy it. Want to remind the audience that we please join us for future town hall sessions. Our next session is going to be Wednesday, March 10th at 1 o'clock Eastern. Our guest will be Chris Nissen of MITRE. Chris is one of the authors of the Deliver Uncompromised report that was really the genesis of some of the things that Bill was just talking about in terms of uncompromised delivery and sustainment. Chris is working on a new book on supply chain risk that he's going to share some details with us, I hope. And then on March 17th, we will have the CMMC accreditation body back with Jeff Dalton filling us in on all the latest developments. If you don't have those on your calendar, as far as invitations go, please go look at our website, neosystemscorp.com, for the details and registration. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time.